Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, as we are having people really joining us from across the globe. My name is Wael Safat. I'm very delighted to welcome you today. I'm the chair of the CIPS MENA Fellows, and on behalf of the CIPS MENA Fellows and also the CIPS MENA organization, I would like to welcome you today to one of the most exciting webinar with regards to ecosystem collaboration and the global intelligence of supplier data. We're very fortunate to have the CEO and the founder of the Tealbook, and obviously the session today is going to really not only talk about the leading practice in digital procurement, but also as well women in leadership and the startup of entrepreneur. Happy to hand over the floor to my colleague, the vice chair of the committee, Mariam, who will walk us through the presentation. I'll manage the Q&A. Mariam, over to you, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Ecosystem Collaboration and the Importance of Intelligent Supplier Data, with our guest speaker, Stephany Lapierre. Stephany is going to talk about Tealbook, a company that she has founded in 2014. This is a solution managing the supplier data. With the pandemic, with the need of having a platform with up-to-date, relevant, and consolidated information about the supplier has become very key, and it is essential to be agile and to react fast to the situation. So during the session, please use the Q&A box to ask any question you have, and not the chat. You have it below your screen. Thank you, Stephany, for joining us today and giving us more insight on our supply data management and how it is critical to be managed. Thank you, Stephany. So we will have, after Stephany's presentation, the Q&A session. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Wael, and CIPS MENA for inviting me this morning or this evening to share my story and talk about what I think is one of the most critical assets for procurement in order to deliver on this transformation that we've been so looking forward to achieving successfully. And we'll talk about some of those, what I believe are some of the barriers. And the team asked to talk a little bit more about myself before diving in. I'm originally from Quebec, so I'm French Canadian. I've lived outside of Quebec longer than I lived in Quebec, so that ages me a little bit. And I'm a mother of 3 girls. I have a 15, a 12, and a 9-year-old. And I do hope that what I'm doing by building this tech company has been able to influence them to know that, they can achieve whatever they want and they put their mind to, because this was a big undertaking. And a lot of people, misunderstood or didn't quite, it took a long time to figure out how to communicate Tealbook properly and why this problem was such a big problem. And it's something that I was exposed to fairly early in my career. I worked for a few companies in the early days, a startup, then I worked for a big pharmaceutical company in a very competitive environment. And I had the luxury of working for a data company and saw the power of data very early on in my career. And so it's just a combination of these things that led me to start a first company. And this company was called Matchbook. And the premise of that business was to help find innovation. And I, in a role that I was previously in a pharmaceutical company in a very competitive space, what I found is that I was always looking for innovation, for ways to differentiate our business. And I found it was incredibly difficult. I was meeting a lot of suppliers, having, lunches and coffees with suppliers telling me how innovative they were. But at the end of the day, I just didn't find them to be incredibly innovative, and I needed to find innovation. So it led me to a few years later, I was pregnant with my first daughter and decided to think, like, what do I want to do? And put the things that I really enjoyed down and gave me energy. I think that's really important when you're looking to build your career, is you have to love what you do every day and focus on the things that you really enjoyed. Obviously, not everything is always enjoyable, but if you can focus on the majority of the things that you really enjoy and gives you energy, life is really short. And so I think everybody should do that exercise if you haven't yet. For me, it was a lot about connection, and it was also about problem solving. I really enjoyed solving problems. I was always growing up thinking about new ideas. And I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And I was quite influenced by my grandmother on my dad's side, who took over from her husband, which was my grandfather, Pepsi in Quebec. So my grandfather had started a bottling and distribution franchise of Pepsi early in probably in the 40s, bottling by hand and distributing basically, with a car door to door. And unfortunately passed away when he was 60 years old. My grandmother was left with 3 kids, had never worked in her life, and decided to take over the business and partnered with she had a head of finance, she had a head of supply chain, and they were able to go to PepsiCo and defend the fact that even though she was a woman, she could run the business, and they let her keep the franchise, and she was able to successfully, provide for her family and build a really strong brand in Quebec. I believe in Quebec is one of the only places in the world that Pepsi has higher market share than Coke. And so I'd like to attribute that some part to my family. But that was really incredibly inspiring for me to see this woman who, raised a family, was, not married anymore. She was a widow, and was also very, feminine. She remained very feminine, very connected to her employees, very connected to the community. And to me, that was just incredibly inspiring. And so I think I always had this DNA of wanting to be an entrepreneur. And when I started this first business, the premise was really to help find innovation for companies. And very quickly, it led to some really interesting projects, mostly in the life science space. That was my background. So I focused initially there. And it was innovation across, a lot of different challenges, that it was packaging, that was patient support related, that it was on the commercial side. So there's a lot of new things happening with clinical trials. And our customers, the clients we were serving, were just really hungry to find suppliers that had either solved similar problems with other companies. Most companies don't have unique challenges, or bring suppliers that could together come up with an innovative way to address a challenge. And I really enjoyed that business. We put together a process that would go from requirements all the way to presentation of suppliers. That was about 6 weeks, which been known to me was really fast in the procurement world. But what it did is that it opened my eyes to the function of procurement, because there was a lot of similarity, and my customers were asking if my consulting business could help, move procurement from cost savings to value creation, as they were starting to formalize strategic sourcing as a function. And so very early on, this was about 15, 16 years ago, I was able to work with different functions, acting basically like an innovation-led strategic sourcing arm, to now building strategic sourcing function, moving away from the 7-step process, which we could see that the business was running from any processes or any roadblocks to achieving goals for the business was being perceived as not value add, but really as a blocker. And to me, when I started getting exposed to the dynamics between procurement, who had very different goals initially, to the business, I saw that the biggest gap for procurement to deliver value was not having the insight or the information they needed to be able to have a conversation based and founded into data. And so when I start kind of digging in and understanding, why is this happening? Because you've got procurement coming to the table. If they don't have enough information or insight over the business is going to see it as, being more of just a roadblock, or someone that's just there as a third party and not adding value to the process. And the business continued to progress. I have a lot of my contacts went to biotech companies that were raising, large rounds of capital and were launching their first commercial asset in a very short period of time. And so initially they start calling my consulting firm to ask, I need, the best example is Grout, because it's literally, they needed every single supplier across the commercial supply chain in order to successfully get file for the FDA and get their drug approved. And so what I start seeing quickly, they went from very tactical to suddenly like, this is the same, it's the same ecosystem, it's the same path to launching a commercial asset. They all have the same needs of the same type of suppliers. And in many cases, they needed to have, tiering of tier 2, tier 3, even tier 4, so that they would have risk mitigation plan when they were filing for the FDA. So they had to do an enormous amount of sourcing, diligence, negotiating, even putting these suppliers on contract, even though they may never use them. And so my firm started looking at, hey, can we build a footprint that accelerate that process and builds procurement in a different way that's more focused on speed, enablement, transparency, risk mitigation, and scale versus what we had known traditionally procurement to be. And so I had the luxury of working across hundreds of companies that were fast growing. What I start seeing very quickly, even though we had this, amenable sort of vision of building a better procurement function, is as soon as we start introducing software, we needed data out of our financial system that was not great. We needed to get that data enriched, cleansed, deduplicated, and then we needed to feed that data into software for the software to deliver the value. And then in order for that data to stay up to date, it relied on humans, people in the company, and mostly suppliers to come and put their information in a portal. And what we saw very quickly is that suppliers didn't come, not at the speed and scale that we needed them to come, and employees were not super reliable in putting their information in. And that was with one software. And so as you started to add software for automating, invoicing and payment and contract and sourcing and third-party risk management, and now we've got ESG and we've got diversity and we've got all these different systems across the life cycle, it just created more and more friction, more and more disparity. And you end up with having a lot of data, but in many, many, many places with people responsible to collect this information through portals that are typically dependent on suppliers. And so I saw this ecosystem as not scalable. And I start seeing a lot more investment in software and just more friction as companies started to grow and really not materialize or not optimizing the investment they made in suppliers. And when I think, and you're all in procurement here, when I think of the investment made for each single supplier that's get onboarded into our system, all the way from discovery to sourcing to diligence, negotiation, contract, onboarding, paying, maintaining, all of these activities need information and data to be collected. And this represents, we did a study with Spend Matters, and there's someone else that we worked with, I'm blanking right now, but it was the cost of resources and time just to maintain a record per year was $2,400 per year. And I know there's a big debate, in the past, we talk about $500 per record per year, but if you think of all the activities associated across all the different function, when they did the calculation, that was about $2,400 a year. So think about just to maintain a record of a supplier. If you have 10,000 suppliers, 30,000 suppliers, 75,000 suppliers, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars spent, mostly just doing, right? Collecting, trying to enrich, trying to piece the things together. And if you ask most organizations if they have confidence in the quality and the completeness of who they do business with today, at the speed and scale that they need it, everybody smiles and no one raises their hand, because no organization in the world today has really good quality data. And so that's sort of a lot of background for where I ended up building Tealbook. But what it was to me so obvious is that if we spend so much money onboarding and getting these suppliers into a system to do business with us, and we have tens to hundreds of thousands of suppliers globally, and we don't have the information that we can optimize a supplier base who can drive a better EBITDA, they can drive better savings, they can drive innovation, they can drive our ESG target, then we're missing out on hundreds of millions of dollars in value. And that was the puzzle that I started to be really focused on. It's like, how can we solve this? This is not a people problem or a process problem or even a software problem. This is a data problem. And so that for the last 7 years, I've been really focused on how can we solve this? And just so, for context, and I'm sure if you're here today, you probably understand that data is critical, but just to support, there's more and more studies that are coming out or research being done. That's what's the impediment of the digital transformation, is having good quality data. I think we've seen a lot of this during COVID where, I may have information on my spend, which I've been able to automate because I've had invoices, but spend is a tiny little portion of the story. And when we saw with COVID is you needed a lot more information a lot faster, and most organizations didn't have it. And so a lot more reactive, and the goalpost keeps changing. If you think 2 years ago when COVID hit, it was a lot about contingency, supplier base, being able to source, to secure as fast as possible. It was to find PPEs to keep your employees safe, or ingredients if you change your manufacturing to support the crisis. In North America, Black Lives Matter happened. Suddenly a lot of companies that didn't care about supplier diversity start caring and start putting programs together. Then suddenly you got, big commitments to ESG. And so ESG started becoming a priority at the board level. Then procurement teams are scrambling, trying to figure out how do we track and report all the elements of ESG. Third-party risk management becomes increasingly more important because there's so much disruption. And now in the past, few months with, a lot of talk about recession and the growing, inflation rate, we're now going back to cost savings and trying to consolidate, right? So we're seeing more and more change. And if you're not thinking about data today, you really should, because, if you keep doing what you're doing, which may get you by, it won't allow you to get to the next stage, which is really truly be agile and be able to move at the rhythm or the speed that the business needs you to move. And, more and more demands that we've seen for procurement and supply chain professional is to be able to deliver the type of value that the business is expecting in a very disparate technology ecosystem, in a very difficult, place where you can't necessarily access good data. And so I typically like, this is no one's fault. I think the limitation were definitely more on the technology itself than the intention to get access to good data. And we know many, many companies who have attempted to clean their master data, to centralize their supplier data information, mostly using software. Again, if the software relies on people, you're still going to always have constraints. And don't try to read this slide. This is really ugly on purpose. This is what we see in most of our customers. This is a real life example of a client's architecture and how disparate and disconnected it is. And so multiple systems, most of them have supplier portals that relies on suppliers to come and put their information, often the same information that they have to put in multiple portal. They buy and spend, millions of dollars in the S2P solution. Some of those modules don't become useful until there's information. There's enough data and information to be useful. So often modules are parked for months at a time, even though you spend millions of dollars on them. And even when you implement those software, if the software, for example, on the ROI calculation, say on $1 billion in spend, you could save 140 million. I'm just picking a number. Most of the time, what we're seeing is that the actual ROI will be significantly less, maybe even in the 20 or 30 million, not the 140 million. And the gap is typically caused due to low compliance and not be able to optimize the investment you made in the software, because the software actually needs data in order to be able to deliver promised ROI. I really like this slide because 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to be at a conference and watching Eloise Epstein. If you don't know her, I suggest you connect with her. She's at Kearney. And she put this slide, up and talked about her prediction for the future. And this is a time where, I built a data company, it was very, very difficult to explain to investors, to explain to customers, how we were going about this differently, why, we were using technology like machine learning to improve data over time. Why would customers want to put their data in the cloud? This is all not that long ago that, I would hear CPOs saying like, I will never put my data in the cloud. And so when I sat in this presentation and watched her speak about where we were at the time, this is 4 years ago, we were having disparate software that were not connected, in each software had its own data stack. And there was no way to integrate that data to each other. And so if you're responsible for risk, you have your visibility into risk and you're collecting data for risk and you're trying to report for risk. And then you have another team that's for sourcing that has a different data set that's trying to enable sourcing, but none of it is connected. That means you can't optimize the information at scale and really deliver on true enablement. What she talked about is a lot of companies were starting to think, okay, if I could connect my systems to each other through a data lake, I could, collect the data that comes from risk to the data that comes from sourcing to my data that comes from my, AP to even my accounts receivable if I want customer data. And I'm going to create a data cloud where all this data are going to come together. And the biggest challenge in what we've seen with our customers who've done this is it's taken them 5 years, millions of dollars, and they still have to normalize and unify data because the data in different systems look very different from each other. And then you're only limited to what you know. And what you know is very little compared to what you need to know about your supplier base and the world around them that impacts them every day. And so there's a lot of limitation in what we're seeing with those customers. And I'll talk later about Goldman Sachs and NASDAQ, is that they're very sophisticated in their infrastructure. They've built a data warehouse. They've built the data lake. They have the integration. Some of them have even built their own UI. But it's the data is the biggest friction, because once they do this, they have to maintain it. They have to support it. It's very expensive. And they're still missing all the third-party data that they need to feed and unify back to their record. A massive undertaking. And we know because that's what we focus on. And in the future state, which is probably the most exciting and where we are building in our development, I'll talk a little bit more about our platform, is how do you have a consolidated, optimized, cloud-based infrastructure that your data gets smarter over time, that it combines internal and external data that can feed into any interface. So no matter if it's your source to pay system or your P2P system, to your sourcing tool, to your, ESG or sustainability tool, to your risk management system, to your contract management system, how can you distribute the same data across all the systems so that the people using the system can leverage the right information at the right time to deliver on their business outcome? And this becomes really powerful because not only it gives you a centralized place where you can see your data across 100% of your suppliers, it starts generating insight. And then it also enable all the teams to work around the same data set. So this is a world where we're seeing a lot more in sales and marketing. I think the biggest barrier for this is interoperability between system, and the technology in procurement is just really far behind what we've seen in sales and marketing. And so even more important to not depend on connecting systems to each other, because the solutions are going to keep adding and changing, but it's really to have a data foundation that can power all these applications. And what we've seen, and this is not the latest version of her slide, and she talks about all the new solution, actually the new one that she published recently, which I should probably have here, as something like 60 ESG related new solution on the far top side. And it just talks about all these solutions today that depend on suppliers to come to a portal for the system itself to deliver on the value. And so when she put Tealbook as the data foundation that can power the investment, not replace it, but really augment the investment in those systems, it allows procurement to think about having a much more interchangeable, much more flexible, agile ecosystem. You're not bound by the software anymore. The time to value of your software is much faster. You're getting better data, better usability of your systems. You deliver better ROI. On top of that, now you have basically a brain that can show you the information that you need to have at a speed and scale that your team needs to be able to build your strategic objective, to be able to also enable your team to respond appropriately, even enable your stakeholders to be able to use the information and drive compliance to what you're looking for them to achieve. And so how we've tackled this, and I want to be conscious of time because I want to keep time for the conversation, so I may skip through a few slides, but we've been looking at doing this differently. In the early days of Tealbook, it was supplier dependent. So when I started Tealbook 7 years ago, we built a LinkedIn-like platform. We would sell the value to customers that we would load their data. They would be able to see it in a LinkedIn-like interface. And we're going to invite suppliers to come to their profile. And it would be one profile per supplier that would distribute the information to all the customers. And, this was totally granted. That's how LinkedIn had built. You had to come and you had to claim your profile and enrich it and maintain it. But what we quickly found out is suppliers didn't want to come to another portal. It didn't matter if the profile was connected to multiple buyers and that over time it was going to give them more intelligence or visibility. There was not a big enough incentive for suppliers to care. And it was free, and what we found out, quickly is like, if we can't scale, if we can't get the suppliers to come and update their information, how else are we going to do this? And that's when I was introduced to my first CTO, who had worked at Ariba for 10 years. So he understood the space. He also had worked at Google and studied big data and machine learning. And this was the biggest magic moment in the Tealbook journey, was that technology and the more massive adoption of cloud and, the machine learning development that was happening, leveraging some of even the models from Google, would enable us to start seeding data ourselves. And we couldn't find, like, between DNB and LexisNexis and all these different data sources, there's no data that we could trust or we found to be good enough and complete and trusted so that we could seed it with something else. And so this was very important. Like, hey, can we seed data ourselves using this technology and then create a digital profile for every B2B company in the world? And so that's when we started doing this work. That was 6 years ago. We got our first institutional round, and we launched, I think it was 8 months later, with 600,000 supplier profile. We're now at 5.5 million, and we're also monitoring about 12 million global suppliers. And so the intent there is, like, we want to know, and these are all machine learning project, is like, what qualifies as a B2B company versus a hair salon? Then you want to know, okay, if I identify a B2B company, what about them that's interesting to the buy side? What do they do? So getting pretty granular in products and services they offer, where are they physically located, who their customers are, who are they affiliated from a parent and child hierarchy, where do they do business, and so we want to really kind of find a way to complete the information in a profile, knowing we wouldn't get all the attributes to be high quality right off the bat, but if we could get enough information, we would be able to find ways to sell this data to customers. And so we started initially with a search engine, and we said, if the data and the profiles are not good enough, but if we're pointing to companies that are most similar to one another, we may be able to satisfy a discovery use case, and our customers may pay for that because they're always looking for contingent suppliers for all kinds of reasons, to introduce competition. If they're growing fast, maybe they look for suppliers in different countries that are very similar to the ones that they do business with in their own country. It could be for finding innovation. It could be to relocate their supply chain, and we figure that we could satisfy multiple use cases if we had a search engine that was valuable enough. And so that's what we went to market with about 6 years ago. Through that journey and working with large customers like Johnson & Johnson, they challenged us to see what could we automate that takes us a lot of time. And one of those was certificates. We collect certificates across multiple systems for suppliers for many different criteria. One of them in North America, which is quite important, is supply diversity. And so they challenged us to see, could you improve not only the reporting, the automation of the reporting, which today takes us 6 to 8 weeks. It's incredibly manual between collecting certificate, validating the, cleansing your data, consolidating to the right entity, packaging it for reporting. And we think we underreport because we're not convinced that all the suppliers are coming to the portal to put their certificate. And so we used our machines to see if we could actually deliver better results. And within 2 weeks, and I should say that I should preface that at the beginning of this process, we asked them what good would look like. And they said, if we could accelerate the reporting by 25% and identify 50 to 100 suppliers that are net new in their own data, that qualified, that were certified based on what they recognize and reported on, that would be a massive win. And so we came back 2 weeks later. Not only we automated their reporting by 75%, we identified 800 suppliers that had not come to the portal that were underreported. That represented 20% improvement in their diversity spend. We also start look for indicators of businesses that look like they should be small and diverse, but were not certified. That was a big pipeline enabler for our clients, because 95% of businesses, at least in North America, and I would say that it's probably more around the world, are not certified. So they may be women-owned, they may be veteran-owned, they may be LGBTQ-owned, but they're not certified, so they don't count. Meanwhile, a lot of companies right now are making commitments to spending money with small, diverse businesses to introduce innovation and ensure that they are meeting the compliance requirements. They're only tapping in a very, very small percentage of the entire ecosystem. So if we could find ways to use our data to open up opportunities for them to exceed on their goal, that was a big win. So for the past few years, we've been selling our data through our own application to serve these use cases that we could deliver. What we've done in the past 12 months, so we've now raised 72 million US, and the biggest round that we had was last November. We closed a $15 million Series B, was to look at the tech that we built 6 years ago and say, hey, we've learned a lot. We now have customers across 16 sectors. We have also seen technology advance so much in our space, and we have the capital now to look. So it was either an option to upgrade what we had built or completely replatform. And the decision was to replatform because we want to leverage the newest technology for us to build something that was massively scalable and much closer to my vision that data should flow into all systems. Data should also be transparent. We're not going to get perfect data across all attributes, but if we could show customers what they should or can trust and give them more control and governance over that data, that if they need to validate themselves, they can do it, or they can accept a high trust score, they can reject data that's not good enough yet. They could apply business rule and then distribute the data that they need by choosing a data pack based on the use case that they need to satisfy. And a few examples of that could be, I need 5 fields in my ERP right now where it's missing a lot of those fields and I need it for reporting. I could also, for my sourcing tool, I need 25 fields for going to RFP. In my onboarding system, I need 75 attributes to onboard suppliers. And today I'm really counting on suppliers to come and do this manually in all these different systems. And so again, if we could do this in a much more flexible, scalable way, that would not limit us to the use case we've been selling for the last 6 years, but it would open up customers to use our data for endless amounts of use case, really unlocking hundreds of millions of dollars and also optimizing the investment that they've made in their technology. And so, just going from the left-hand side to the right, we sort of talk about our data pipeline around sort of the fuel, because the opportunity to feed data sources, basically endless data sources, is so critical. So looking at millions of different sites, sub-site databases, some paid partnership, very limited. Today, we've been able to seed data with a lot of information that we've been able to collect. We have terms and conditions in our data. We also have customers feeding their own data into our pipeline. And what it does is it takes all the data that we have collected, that normalize it, and we're able to match it to the right entity. And so we have multiple identifier. This allows us to improve the speed and the match of the right entity very, very quickly, and then complete the information with the data that our customers are looking for. And so today we have an average of 75 attributes per suppliers at different degrees of quality. Our goal and the eternal investment is to ingest more and more sources of data so that we can cover and expand the number of attributes to deliver on more and more requirements of our customers. And also more data sources points to attributes to show, is this trusted? Is there a lot of sources that point to the same field or the same record? Or are we seeing conflicted information? If it's conflicted, we may not trust it. And so we would put a lower trust score. Our clients, again, have the flexibility now to apply business rules. They're going to be able to, through APIs, they can feed this into Tableau, into their own UI, into a data lake, into their S2P, into really any digital solutions that they buy where they need data so that they can, again, optimize the investment that they've made in that tech. We are rebuilding some of our interface. So we're in the process right now. We've partnered with 4 customers, that being Goldman Sachs, Standard & Poor's, Albemarle, and Freddie Mac, to help us with the requirements in the new platform. And we're opening it up now to 9 additional customers. And that includes NASDAQ, Harvard, other clients that have come on stage with me recently to talk about why is this problem so prevalent, so expensive, and why it matters. Because at the foundation, and you'll see, I've included a few quotes, is, you need information to be able to enable procurement to deliver true value. And if you don't have that data, the blockers are going to keep coming and you're not going to be able to get to the other side. And so that's just, on our architecture. I want to wrap it up so that we have time to chat, but these are some quotes, and I'm hoping CIPS will be able to distribute. But if you also want more information, we do have a resource link that CIPS is going to send you tomorrow. It includes some of the presentations that I've had. So I had the opportunity to present with Tim Harrod at DPW in Amsterdam with Eloise Epstein. And what I love about his presentation is he talks about his experience as a CPO, having multiple digital transformation under his belt and failing, each time buying Oracle, implementing Oracle at different sites, and then thinking about the data after and the amount of friction that caused to, buying into SAP and Ariba and buying all these modules to sit around and not be able to actually get the value because either the module never really delivered on this promised value. Ultimately, they never were able to consolidate the data in the way that they needed to. And so in its transformation now at Albemarle, this is a lithium mining company. They're growing incredibly fast. They're fully now transforming the business. So they're in the earlier stage of their transformation. They're thinking, if we're going to have all these different modules, all these different solutions with all these different use cases, how else would we go after the data if we can't automate how we're collecting, enriching, and distributing better data across all these different modules? And so it's a great partnership. It's a great conversation with him. Again, very humble CPO. He talks about how hard it is even to get his team to think about the change management. And they've made so much progress. They're so excited. And data foundation is one of their 3 core priorities for the next 12 months. And again, don't look at this too much, but this is just an example where his team went off, came back, and then designed where does Tealbook fit within their technology stack and the use cases, and what's the data flow. And so we're working with each of our customers on defining that North Star. Now, Goldman Sachs is a little bit different. They are quite sophisticated in what they've built already. So they have a data lake. They even built a UI, but the UI doesn't have the field that it's needed in order for stakeholders to be able to leverage it in the way that delivers the most value. And their data lake also doesn't easily normalize data and needs external data to be able to satisfy more requirements. And so Goldman Sachs has been a partner and a customer for 3 years now. And now we've extended with the new platform, unlocking additional use cases and really feeding our data into their infrastructure that they've already built. And so it's fun to work with them because they're quite savvy. They understand some of the opportunities, some of the challenges that we're facing as we're building this for the entire world. But they've been a great partner. S&P is an investor, partner, customer of ours, and they've partnered on this, also the new platform requirement. Their big focus is unlocking more data around sustainability. And so with them, it's sort of looking at what are the attributes that can feed their ESG effort and their risk management effort as well. And then the last one is Freddie Mac, who we've been also partnering for about 3 years. They have to report supplier diversity to the SEC. So the first use case was supplier diversity. We launched a tier 2 program where we could automate the reporting of their tier 1 suppliers at no cost to the supplier. 72% of their suppliers are reporting today their own diverse spend. And beyond diverse, if you think about that, we have the opportunity to load the master data of suppliers across 72% of their suppliers. Now, we can't share openly that data, but because we have aggregated anonymized right to it, we're able to expose to Freddie Mac some trends around risk, innovation, localization. And so over time is how can we leverage this data across our entire network to give and start mapping supplier tiering visibility, which is a huge, as challenge, especially when you can't even get good data on your tier 1 suppliers. So great initiative. Now we're moving into data foundation where they're moving from one system to another. Instead of taking the data from one system and moving it directly into another source to pay system and ERP, they're using Tealbook as the data foundation to enrich the data and really being that bridge to the new system and continuously enrich data in the new system. So really interesting. We're looking at 4 different customers in different sectors, different maturity level, different technology stack, but they're all facing this big data problem that is incredibly costly. And they're all incredibly motivated to solve this with us and tell the world of what they're doing and why they're partnering with Tealbook to solve it. So how do we quantify ROI? Honestly, it's tricky because it depends on the use case and it depends on the customer. And there's ways to qualify or to calculate ROI just if you could reduce, the $2,400 to maintain a record per year by automating it down to, $50 or $100, we're talking millions of dollars in saving from a basic, operational cost to how much data are you buying from different service providers where you're duplicating fields just because you need that one data set and this, third party. If we can consolidate that, reduce some of this third party spend that you would need to invest anymore. If a client is building their own data infrastructure, they're spending millions of dollars, and our intention is to give this out of the box. You're still going to need some some infrastructure and API or the integration done with our API on your side, but it eliminates a lot of the cost of maintaining a data infrastructure. And then think about just the investment that you're not optimizing in your systems to generating better outcome from on the other side, how your functional team are able to deliver to their goals much faster and right. So it's almost hard to digest because there's so much. But what we did do is partner with Spend Matters about a year ago and ask them, how would you quantify this for customers? And so we have built a calculator. We are using it with our customers based on their maturity curve, how many suppliers they have, the use cases, and then we're able to help our customers really shape that ROI story. Even if it's a small ROI from a savings perspective up front, it would easily justify the spend, and then you can start unlocking and putting gates to all these other ROI opportunity. But showing even savings up front is a great way to be able to justify, the spend and start on that data journey. And we've been really fortunate to be recognized for multiple awards. Always, nice when Gartner, recognized us. Spend Matters every year now for 4 or 5 years. We've been initially suppliers to watch, to now we're providers to know. We came up on the Procure Tech 100. So getting a lot of visibility from analysts, especially when you're building a business, is critical because, as you know, procurement buys from technology they trust, where you get tangible returns or tangible value. And that was very important. Like, what's the time to value? What can we give our customers today? And what's the long-term journey with, as they're continuing to grow with us, to have this really solid data foundation and be able to deliver on hundreds of millions of dollars in value. And Miriam, I'll let you come back in, and I can't see the question, so you'll have to guide me on some of the question. I'll just turn off my screen now.
Thank you, Stephany. It was really very interesting and very inspiring, your journey, your success. Congratulations. The first question is, do you need to be a certain size to start using Tealbook? Can SMEs use it, or is it for major company?
I mean, if you have in the few hundreds of suppliers, I'd say it's probably not as valuable if today you're able to collect that information fairly easily. We see value when you have in the thousands of suppliers, like 2,500 to 5,000 to 10,000. The more suppliers you have, the harder it is to have visibility across your entire supplier base and be able to optimize where you need to consolidate, where you need to introduce competition. The number of record alone are an impossible task to keep. And so I'd say SMEs can use it. We have customers who've used it early on to start managing their data. They've also used it for seeking pipeline. And so during COVID, we had a client who was, they developed a fabric that's antibacterial, antiviral or something like that. And so they were looking for manufacturers that would buy their fabric. And so they kind of flipped Tealbook around in the search engine to look for businesses, manufacturers that were most similar to their customers, to be able to find clients. And it worked. Like they were able to, generate pipeline through using Tealbook in that way. So not the use case we had built Tealbook for, but pretty good, interesting way of leveraging our technology and our data.
Second question, what are the typical challenges to get to buy in your solution inside the company?
I think I often say this to my team, if a company doesn't believe they have a data problem. And so recently I was at a conference, and this VP of procurement was at our booth, and he was saying to one of my sales director that his data was great. And so, and he was like, oh, in North America, our data is great. And I was like, oh, that's amazing, because I never hear this. And so tell me more. And then he was saying that Zycus cleans his data once a quarter. Now, I'm just saying that alone, not because of Zycus, but if you clean your data once a quarter, you don't have the data at the speed and scale, and it's probably not very complete. It's probably spend and maybe categories. But he didn't believe he had a data problem. And so you're not going to convince someone if they don't think they have a data problem. And so if you have, a fairly disparate technology ecosystem, and you believe that data is an enabler to be able to, deliver on better business outcome, then start with a use case that is more tangible. Like, what's from a time to value? And it could be Really simple. I was talking to a client yesterday. She has no visibility through acquisition. Their data is a mess. She just wants to get visibility right now so that she knows who she does business with, how many actual suppliers they have, right? To reduce the duplication. They want to have better categorization so they can start reporting on it. And they're in the process of implementing new tools. So she doesn't want to do it for every system. She wants to do it from Tealbook into the system. And she has now a new task of reporting for diversity and sustainability, right? So now she can have the baseline, and she wants to enable her team to be able to source suppliers so she can start with her application doing discovery. Like, we can load your data and you got your DNA of what's your master data by existing suppliers. You can find similar suppliers out of our 5.5 million network. It's pretty fast. So working with our team and identify like what's the pain, how big is the pain, and how quickly can we get value is usually a really good way to then build a business case and get the funding, get the budget.
And is the Tealbook used only by the procurement department, or other departments are also using it, like finance, and how is it used in the company?
Yeah, so procurement is typically the buyer of Tealbook, and there's some exception. I think the intent for procurement, especially if they're using it, so the data can be used anywhere. So from a buyer of the data, once you have the platform, who needs the data could be any function. Now, from an interface user, so if they're using our application, which is quite flexible, doesn't need to use our application, that's typically sourcing, or it could be the stakeholders. If you're trying to drive more compliance to the suppliers you already have under contract, so your goal may be, I don't want to introduce new suppliers. I just want to make sure that my buyers or my stakeholders are not going to Google and calling, this person, Joe, because they work with them in the past and introduce more suppliers unnecessarily. Just enabling your business to be able to know, hey, who have we used for piping for this? Who are we using for executive training in Abu Dhabi? So then you have access to the information. You can leverage those existing contracts. And some other stakeholders or maybe category managers, they want the world because they need to always look for contingency suppliers and ways to challenge the business to think differently. And so if they have access to this data, it puts them in a much more powerful value add partner because they have access to the information. And one of my favorite story of a customer was, there was talking about piping. They knew there was a contract, a very significant contract due for renewal. The category manager went to the business to ask them if they would run an RFP just to make sure, if there was other suppliers that could deliver more value and they could achieve some savings. The business pushed back right away. There's only one supplier in the world that can do this type of piping, as we all heard. And the category manager had already checked in Tealbook, had created a list and said, hey, I found 6 suppliers that do the same type of piping in our space. Do you mind if I ask them just to make sure we're getting the most value, even if it's a way to negotiate a renewal? And they saved $25 million. Right? And so just because you're able to influence in a conversation and came in a position of no value and insight, the business couldn't push back because he had the data just to show. And so that's talk about instant ROI for the amount of money they spend on Tealbook. And within the first 3 months, being able to have the opportunity to save $25 million is pretty astronomical.
And how do you deal with the markets which don't have a mature data about suppliers? Like in Middle East, the data is not really easy to find. So how do you deal with this kind of markets?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we've been focusing mostly in North America and Europe. We do have, out of the 12 million companies that we're monitoring globally, it covers most countries, but I'd say the concentration, because when we started Tealbook and most of our customers were North America based, but operated globally. And so we are still today focused on English language. And so that provide definitely some constraint in any other languages. That's something that we're changing on our roadmap in the next year, is to be able to have our machines translating from different languages and then also offering it in the language that our customers are looking to receive it. So when we're looking for sources of data, that's the limitation. What I would say is that, especially we had one of our customers that was looking for small, diverse businesses in India. And so we were very successful at identifying, I think it was like 120,000 businesses that were small and diverse in India by looking at all kinds of sites, subsites, even suppliers that don't have a website may have a Facebook account. So we're looking through, how can we generate these profile and how do we ensure that these companies are real companies? And we use a lot of the DNA, again, of our customers, because once we know a supplier is connected to a buyer, then we start looking at what other suppliers are most similar or relevant, no matter the country. So that helps us expand our footprint. We had a client that was looking for suppliers in Egypt. And so just the fact that they were starting to do business with suppliers in Egypt, you could see our supplier base in Egypt starts to grow and expand. And so again, it's an evolution. And what I'd say is our data is not perfect, but it's so much better than anything else that is available. And our eternal investment is to ensure that we're making it more robust, we're making it more accurate, and we're giving our customers visibility per attribute and knowing what they can trust and what they can't trust. So to be clear, in our interface today, they can't do that. They get all of the data in the new platform that we're releasing over the next 12 months in phases. That data set has a trust score for every single attribute. So you can know if you can trust it or not, or you need to validate on your end.
Okay, so you were saying that you focus on yourself on the America and Europe. Do you see different challenges in these regions, or that they have the same issues, the same challenges?
The use case are a little bit slightly different. Obviously, supply diversity in Europe is not as common. Sustainability is much more mature. In North America, it's sort of the opposite. They've been reporting on supplier diversity, and they're now wrapping their head around ESG. But from having visibility, like there's in Germany right now with the tiering, I think there's a regulation right now that you have to report on tier 2 and tier 3. And so those are big challenges, especially when it's started to be regulated. You need to find ways to be able to do it. So yeah, different markets. I'd say this past year, EMEA has been most successful for us in terms of closing deals. And we just find it to be slightly more mature in the way they're thinking. And I think the requirements are becoming much more regulated and forcing customers to be able to figure out how to get access to better data and be able to feed it to their teams and report on it and track it.
And one last question: how the success looks like to measure the effectiveness of proper supplier data in future?
Sorry, repeat the question.
How it looks like to measure the effectiveness of proper supplier data in the future. The success. So
yeah, I think it's very customer dependent. It's actually even functional team dependent, right? So again, our CS team would work with those teams to identify, typically in the sales cycle, we want to know what success looks like. What's going to give us permission that we can high five on something that we can all celebrate, that you can communicate internally, and gives us permission to continue. Right. And then what's that next gate that we're going to high five and remember where we started? Usually our customers start from having no visibility, right? And so it's good to remind people where we started, what is value when, if J&J at the time said we want 100% automation and we want you to find 1,000 suppliers, we would have failed. Like we had to set a realistic goal that was going to be impressive enough. And what they said was like, hey, if you could, this is what good would look like compared to what we're doing today. And so it's that incremental, I think, value. And then if you add it all up, this is where you can see, over time, the impact, and you need to be able to measure it. And so it really depends on the use case, on the company. It's very difficult. And if you don't have the baseline of the information, you're able not to measure, it's very difficult to know where you're starting from. Even if you set a target for sustainability or diversity or savings or whatever it may be, if you don't have the data to baseline where you're starting from and be able to have the data to track and report it and know where you can make an impact, it's very difficult to measure. And so, yeah, I mean, for us, it's definitely the quality of our data across the number of attributes. We're looking right now very narrowly on how fast can we match to the right entity and how good is the match, right? That's super important because we want to remove the human side to validate that we got the right match. And the more we can reduce the validation requirements, the less effort we have to do, our customers have to do on their end if they have to validate. So those are big metrics for us. And then the completeness of the number of attribute. But for customers on the business outcome, it's really, they have to define that and we can help.
I just got one final question. So we're saying that during the pandemic, it was really critical to have reliable data and have backup plans in terms of suppliers. So with the upcoming global recession, how you see the criticality to have this data about the companies, how it will help the companies to really be resilient?
Well, it's not going to stop. The disruption and the changes and the requirements are not getting lighter. They're just getting more complex. And so I think what we're hearing from our customers is that this is not the time to stop the investment in your digital transformation. This is time to accelerate it, because if you get to the other side, then you'll have the opportunity to deliver. A couple of examples that I like, which are, basic questions. One, when I was at DPW in Amsterdam, I asked every CPO, when your CEO or if you're CEO of Commerce, they would come today and ask you how many suppliers you have based in Russia, how long would it take you to give them the answer? And everyone smiled. And it was between 2 days and 3 weeks. 2 days being massively impressive in our world. And then I would ask, okay, how long would it take you to give a risk profiling of those suppliers with a contingency plan? And they all smiled and they all said too long. Right? This is 2022 going to 2023, and we can't answer that question. The only one that could do it was Coca-Cola Pacific, and he spent 5 years building the infrastructure, millions of dollars to answer that question 2 days before the war started, to have the name of the suppliers in Russia, the risk profiling of each supplier with the contingency plan to his CEO 2 days before the war started. And that's really powerful. So he was, by building this infrastructure, he was able to answer that question out of, let's think about thousands of questions that are being asked every day. Now, limitations, right? Because he's built this himself, he has to find ways to maintain it, upgrade it, manage it, which is a huge undertaking. NASDAQ, and there's also in our resource link, if you go, there's a presentation with Jeff Wright, the VP of Procurement. JP Morgan, the CEO of NASDAQ asked him, how much money are we spending with JP Morgan? And he couldn't answer that question. It took them 2 or 3 weeks, because they have 35 instances of JP Morgan. So by the time they figure out how much money are they really spending with JP Morgan, then the CEO asked, how much money are we spending with JP Morgan? Because she was meeting with the CEO and they had to negotiate, and they couldn't answer that question. From that was 5 years ago. From that moment on, they started building the infrastructure that now they're partnering with us to enhance, because these are basic questions that you should be able to answer. And with Tealbook today, you can open your interface, you can search by supplier, by country, by categorization, by classification, by spend, by similar. I mean, it's all there. Like the magic moment of seeing your entire master data on steroid, like just even from a leadership perspective to how you can enable your sourcing teams to your other teams to access the data this way. To me, it's critical, but I'm biased. I made that my life mission.
Thanks a lot, Stephany, for a very interesting insight. Thanks for your time. I will hand over to Wahel for closing the session. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mary, for moderating this. I think, Stephany, on behalf of the CIPS MENA fellows and also the CIPS MENA as well, we'd like to thank you. I think it has been extremely very inspiring and very informative presentation. We welcome as well to reconnect back again with you and your team. And thanks again for joining us today. And also thanks for all the participants. We got a number of people joined from the UK, from North America, from the Middle East. So we appreciate your interest and your time. Wish everyone a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye, Well. Bye, Miriam.
Bye, Stephany.